Back in 2003, I read Sandland, a short one-off manga by Akira Toriyama that I quickly fell in love with. While I remember little about the story, I vividly remember wishing there was more. And now, 20 years later, ILCA's Sandland game looks to do exactly that, and with the blessing of Akira Toriyama, no less. Sandland was a short manga taking place in a world with a limited supply of water. The land's king has been charging citizens more and more for it, so, fed up with the situation, Sheriff Rao recruits the demon prince Beelzebub and his friend Thief in his search for water. One of the most exciting aspects of Sandland is that it further expands the story by adding an entire new region you can explore in Forestland. While the game does cover the events of the original Sandland story, it then adds an entirely new chapter. While interviewing producer Yu Tanada, I asked if Akira Toriyama was involved in writing this new story. He told me that, while Toriyama-san wasn't involved in writing the story, it was sent to him for approval first, and Toriyama gave feedback, while also providing art for new characters, such as the important new character of Anne. And from what I experienced, the writing of the main narrative was a joy. It was filled with the Toriyama-esque humor, and I found myself chuckling multiple times during the portions of the game Bandai Namco had set up for me to play. In particular, the standout was the dim-witted king of Sandland, whose innocent naivety is presented in a fun and humorous way, and delivered with great voice acting.
What? Is that really true, General R.A.?
It's true.
Visually speaking, the world of Sandland looks fantastic. It truly looks like Akira Toriyama's art brought to life. From the environments, to the characters, to the incredibly important vehicles, Sandland feels like a living and breathing Toriyama universe players can readily explore. And as a longtime fan of Toriyama's work, I'd be lying if I said this in and of itself wasn't incentive enough to explore the regions of Sandland and Forestland while looking for fun enemy designs. While the world looks and feels like Toriyama, it wouldn't matter if the game wasn't fun to play. So, Bandai Namco set us up with a number of saves to experience different aspects of the game. We started, according to Bandai Namco, roughly 30 hours into the game, exploring dungeons to find Forestland and rescue Anne. The dungeons we experienced were split between vehicular puzzles and exploration, as well as stealth, infiltration, and a limited use of vehicles. The vehicles of the game are the standout, and a major element that sets Sandland apart from any other action RPG, so it was great to see some dungeons utilize vehicles as part of the puzzle-solving process. That said, for me, the puzzles were a little too easy, but maybe I'm older than the target demographic. The team had set us up on easy difficulty, so I actually manually went in and switched the game to normal difficulty for my playthrough. Even then, the dungeons themselves are constantly set with quest objective markers, making it so you can breeze through a dungeon without really exploring too much in order to solve the puzzle aspects, which was a shame as it felt like it defeated the purpose of having puzzles in the first place. Our first dungeon consisted of finding switches to slowly raise the water level enough that our hover vehicle could float over water to new paths. Rinse and repeat. There were plenty of side paths to explore with treasure chests to find, although given my short time with the game, it's hard to say how appealing this will be to explore or if players will want to just blast through dungeons and on to the next thing. While the dungeon's puzzles were a little disappointing, the boss of the dungeon, being a giant kraken, was a joy to fight. Its moveset was clearly designed for fighting with the hovercraft, but clever players could also find small land masses and quickly swap to fighting in the more powerful tank. This boss, on its own, was well thought out, and I appreciated that while there was a primary tactic players would likely want to use against the boss with the hovercraft, it allowed for alternative ways to fight. Our second dungeon led us into a fortress where we had to use Beelzebub's stealth in order to avoid being seen and take out enemies from behind. It felt very Stealth 101, but with the game swapping between stealth, fighting with Beelzebub, and vehicular combat throughout the dungeon, even though it was basic, it made for a nice change of pace. At the end of the dungeon, we unlocked a brand new vehicle in Power Armor. This armor, while slow, had an incredibly powerful punch that could take down even the game's meaty tanks. It was a welcome addition to our slowly growing roster of vehicles, and once again emphasized just how important vehicular combat was to the game. And speaking of which, after completing this infiltration mission, we were sent to another save further along in the game, which focused on the start of a war, where we were sent to Sandland fighting off tanks with our roster of vehicles. This is where the game shines, and in speaking with producer Tanada-san, the combat seemed to be a heavy focus for the team. Not only was it viable to fight these tanks from each different vehicle, as I swapped from one to another for each cluster to see which one I enjoy the most, the quick swap feature made it somewhat of a strategy as well. Need a quick getaway? Swap to your motorcycle, ride out of there while shooting your shotgun, then switch back into a tank. And you'll eventually unlock secondary modes for these vehicles. The tank, for example, hunkered down into outrigger mode and shot faster, making it an offensive force to be reckoned with, but also left it much more defensively vulnerable. The motorcycle, on the other hand, had an interception drone for blocking homing missiles. All of this is customizable. In our third and final save, we were given a bunch of gear and allowed to tinker around in the game's garage. Here we could swap out parts that not only affected the different vehicles' stats, but in some cases, their weapon fire type. While I didn't get to play around in the garage as much as I would have liked to, mainly because there were other things to see and do, I imagine this will be a big draw of the game. Instead, I tried some of the game's side quests, from fetch quests to racing and bounty hunting. While individually these were all fine, I'm still not sure how fun it will actually be to explore the game's open world. When I asked producer Yu Tanada about what sets Sandland's open world apart from the giant glut of open world games we've been seeing lately, his answer was in the vehicles. And while that's fine, I'm not sure how fun or rewarding exploring will actually be. Will the open world be relegated to a bunch of fetch quests, or will it be littered with interesting things player can openly find? I'm honestly not sure what the answer is here. So I walked away from my time with Sandland primarily excited for the game's narrative and vehicle combat. The game was definitely a fun action game, and I hope the open world elements end up elevating the game rather than feeling tacked on or over-bloating the game. It's definitely one of the most interesting anime/manga adaptations I've played, and it feels like the team at ILCA truly cared not just about Sandland, but also making a fun game.